Data protection is also a concern in the business. In 2017, e-commerce accounted for 6% of all purchases made in Kenya. In the last quarter of 2018, the volume of e-commerce transactions in Kenya done through mobile money services hit $17.8 billion, rising by 16.2% quarter on quarter. But all of this is happening despite the lack of legal protection for consumers or their data. A data protection bill is currently being debated to fix some of those problems, but does it go far enough? Earlier, CGTN's Ramah Nyang spoke to Dr. Rutenberg. He is the director of Strathmore University's Center for Intellectual Property and IT Law, and he started by exploring how Kenya's data protection bill deals with consent and accountability.
You order a laptop, then obviously they have to get it to you. Obviously they have to take payment. So there are, and even though you didn't expressly say you can take my data and give it to those other people who are going to deliver it to me, that's an obvious carve out where data can be transferred. But there are quite a number of them in different laws across the world, and people are trying different ways of allowing for flexibilities in data.
When it comes to the right to correction, I mean, how do we bake protections into law against using that as a tool for censorship?
As with other laws, for example, in defamation, the truth should always be completely exonerating someone who wants to publish something. If something is absolutely true, it should, most data protection laws will allow it to stay on the record. Although there are certain cases such as criminal activity that are expunged from records and that sort of thing, those are specific carve-outs that we make. But from a data retention perspective, there's that aspect that it's true, so it should be there. On the other hand, one of the data protection principles is also that data that is obsolete should be deleted. So if for example, to get into this building, I had to give several pieces of identifying data. That actually violates two principles. One is that they should only ask for a minimum amount of data about me. So one identification is fine. Two is too much, right? They don't need to know who I am more than one way. The second is, how long do they really need to keep a record of me entering a building? A year, maybe two. Beyond that, there's really not much of a reason, I would think, but we can disagree on the amount of time. But there should be a limit as to how long you can keep even factual data like that.
And even then the question becomes, okay, who holds it and what obligations do they have?
Absolutely. And one of the other principles of data protection is that you should not use data for anything other than the purpose it was collected. So a good way of explaining that one, for example, is you go to an airport, you show your passport, the immigration at that airport says, oh, we see your passport details, and we've been notified by your tax collector that you are behind on your taxes, so you can't leave the country. Okay, so that's a violation of data protection principles, because the immigration department is collecting your data, so they know who is entering and leaving the country, not to enforce tax collection, right? The tax collection should be done through the tax authority that goes through courts and et cetera, et cetera.
That's an interesting point you raise, because it seems to me that we're moving towards a situation where a lot of these individual silos of data, right? So the immigration guys have one silo of your data, the tax guys have a separate one, the healthcare guys have a different one, the pension guys have a separate one. But it seems to me that a lot of these databases are now slowly being put together. And in that sort of context, if one arm of government can figure out anything else about you, I mean, that opens up a bit of Pandora's box, doesn't it?
It definitely does. It's not inherently bad to do that, but it does open up, as you said, Pandora's box. So first of all, when you centralize data, you open it up to, you essentially put a big red target on it for anyone who wants to steal data. If data is siloed into 6 or 7 different locations, the government is the only entity that has access to those 6 or 7 locations, right? So they don't need to really worry about access, but hackers or whoever would want to steal your information would need to access all of those different locations. When you centralize it, you make that data so much more valuable and a much bigger target. So you're actually increasing the likelihood of a hack, of a data loss, and the damage that will happen from a data loss. The other thing is, though, as I said before, you have to be very careful. As long as you have a framework, a legal framework that says, you can use this data for these reasons. There are legal processes that must be followed. As long as all of those are working, then centralized data in itself is not necessarily bad. But if you start getting creep into areas like the example I gave, then there is definitely that potential for abuse.